Welcome to Monologues by Hassie, where I'm going to be dropping unsolicited brain dumps from the depths of my grey matter. I'll talk about life, money, society, and self-development, plus whatever else lies up there, whilst hopefully not getting cancelled in the process. When I first started getting serious about high school, when I was about 16 or 17 years old, the subject I gravitated towards was high school chemistry. It was one of these things where I realized that if I put energy into something and I got good results as a result of that, then my teachers would like me more, which would encourage me to study more, which would lead to good results, and my teachers would like me. It was a self-fulfilling cycle where I put energy in, I got good results, and I loved it. And because I loved chemistry so much, it became a big part of my life for the next couple of years, going up to early adulthood. And I remember one of the important things they teach you when they start teaching you about basic chemical reactions is you learn about this concept called activation energy. And activation energy is the energy that we need to input to make a reaction happen. It basically says that if you have A and B, and these are your reagents, then if we want to form product C, have a chemical reaction between A and B, then that's not going to happen automatically. There needs to be an input of energy to make that reaction happen. And that input of energy that we need to provide to make the reaction happen is known as activation energy. It is the energy required to activate that chemical reaction. And it's a really important concept. Now, some reactions will happen at ambient temperature, and it seems like there's no activation energy. And a good example of this is you can Google sodium water reactions where people throw sodium metal into water and you have these really vigorous reactions. And this is a prime example of a reaction where nobody added extra energy. Nobody is heating that water to make that reaction happen. It's simply room temperature water and sodium metal, which is highly reactive. And you get these really vigorous reactions, which you can watch on YouTube. And it might seem like there was no energy required to activate that reaction, but what simply happened there is you had a very low activation energy. The energy in the ambient surrounds was enough to make that reaction happen. But sometimes that isn't the case. And you will see many reactions if you've done high school chemistry at any point, or you've been in a university chemistry or science lab. Sometimes to make a reaction happen, we need to mix the chemicals we want to react. But they won't react until we maybe have to have a stirrer, and maybe we need to heat a beaker to make that reaction actually occur. And that is a very clear example of where we are deliberately inputting energy to make that reaction take place. And this concept of activation energy is very applicable to our lives. And the first thing that I can think of is there are so many activities in our lives which are relatively meaningless, which have very low activation energy. Imagine if you're scrolling YouTube or you're on Reddit randomly browsing or TikTok. These activities, they have designed them to have the lowest possible activation energy. But generally, the rewards from these activities aren't too high. Now, there are some activities where you want to have low activation energy. If you think of the behavior of breathing, you never want to be in a case where it is very difficult for you to breathe. You want that to be a really low activation energy process. And it is, because it happens subconsciously for us. There's one thing where the things that we want to achieve in life and the harder things we want to do, there is often a much higher activation energy to do these tasks. And one thing that I've been dealing with as I work independently is I no longer have these rigid structures where I have a morning meeting where I have to attend, I have a monthly paycheck, I have performance reviews. There are very little extrinsic checks and balances on whether I am doing what I know I need to be doing. And so I found that by kind of coming out of this kind of corporate structure where my life is very dictated and regimented, the activation energy to do all the tasks that I used to do has significantly increased because I have so much access to basically be in control of what I do all the time and not be accountable to anybody else other than myself. And there is a very important lesson I took out of that, because for the last 2 weeks, I settled into a new city in Malaysia, Penang, where I'm staying for the next 3 months. And there have been times, and maybe it's because I've become a bit already worn from the last month of travel where I went through 3 countries, which is quite demanding, that I found myself feeling a bit tired. And at the same time, when I came to Malaysia, January for me was very much a holiday. I went to a friend's wedding and did some trips of my own in Indonesia. But when I got to Malaysia, I remember arriving in Malaysia on February 1st and thinking, wow, I already feel so behind. I really want to get to work and do these things. And I'm amazed at what I've done in the last 2 weeks. But I remember before every single thing I've done in the last 2 weeks, I have felt this concept of activation energy. It's probably because I am still settling, but there is an important lesson. And I have found myself with a mental idea of something that I would like to do, which maybe I'm slightly uncertain of how to do it and what the outcome of that might be. But I feel a type of lethargy, and I will almost try to talk myself out of doing things. And a great example is I signed myself up for a 6-kilometer run where, it was a Chinese New Year walking event, but you had the option of running it. So obviously I took that option. If somebody's going to clear roads for me, I'm going to take it up. And it was one of these things where I knew I wanted to run, but when I started the run, and this is something I face all the time, I was feeling very hesitant, nervous, but then once I started running and once I went the first kind of 2.5 kilometers, I felt really great. I actually felt less exhausted and had more energy by the time I finished. And the way I felt before the run and kind of right at the start versus how I felt at the end, this is one of those cases where the activation energy for me to reach the state that I reached at the end of that run was only reached after I put the first 1 to 2 kilometers in. Because I basically paid the price to make that reaction happen. If I ran 1 kilometer and said, you know what, I'm just going to walk this because I'm not really feeling it, I would not have reached that particular benefit. Now, the next thing that happened is I wanted to visit this temple in Penang for Chinese New Year. And I ended up trying to go on the weekend, but I was really tired on the weekend and I talked myself out of it. I said, I'm here for 3 months and the light show at the temple for Chinese New Year's goes for a month. So it goes until March. And I said, you've got time to do this. And one day went by and I didn't go. And another day went by and I didn't go. And it came to this Tuesday this week and I said, okay, you're going to take a half day at work. You're going to work. You're going to leave at 2 o'clock. You're going to go get ready and you're going to go to this temple. And when I try to leave and go to this temple, I get an Uber or a Grab as you call it here. That's the app they use, the ride sharing service. And every driver I try to get to take me from where I am in Georgetown to this temple, which is about 7 or 8 kilometers away. The first 3 drivers on Grab actually declined. They cancel. They either call me and say, hey, can you cancel this ride? Or they cancel it because a lot of those drivers know that the traffic is really bad. There's a lot of people trying to go to this temple and they simply don't want to go in that area. They know it's going to be maybe not the best use of their time and they can make more money doing smaller jobs in the main town. And I got cancelled 3 times. And as you get cancelled 3 times, every time another driver cancels on you, you think, should I go today? Maybe I should wait till the crowds die down a bit. But again, I remember feeling lethargic in that moment. I wasn't feeling excited. I'd had 3 drivers cancel on me. And, the 4th driver, came and picked me up. And I remember being in the car ride, and it was about a 40-minute car ride to go 8 kilometers, which kind of is an indication of how bad the traffic is. And I remember feeling really lethargic in that car ride, and I arrived at this temple at about 4:30, and I had to wait in probably another 45 to 50 minutes of lines just to get to the top, because I took this lift going up. And I kind of got up there at about 6 o'clock, and I was looking at this really beautiful giant Buddha statue and overlooking the entire city. But I was still feeling really lethargic because I knew I had to wait there a little bit longer to see the beautiful lights at night. And once the sun went down and the light started turning on at about 7:30, all of a sudden this energy came rushing and it was absolutely incredible. It was like this whole level of energy that was hidden inside me was unlocked. And I realized that if I had stayed at home that day and, not attempted to go to that temple, I would not have unlocked that particular state. So the price I had to pay, the activation energy I had to pay to reach that energetic state was I had to have 3 drivers cancel on me, take a really long taxi ride and wait around a few hours until the sun went down. And only then did I achieve the state of the reaction that I wanted, where I got to see these beautiful Disney-like lights and be in this absolute wonderland, this amazing light display that is the Kek Lok Si temple in Penang during Chinese New Year. And I'm glad I did that. And I think the same goes for so many things where we have that initial hesitation. For example, if you go on a first date. There will be first dates where, and not that every first date ends up somewhere, but sometimes you can simply have a nice interaction between people. I have found myself going, do I really want to go on a date with this person? And then I've gone and, even if the date hasn't gone well, I now have another point. I know how to better navigate that situation, or I know something I'm not looking for, and that is a desirable state to be in. So really, there are going to be many things that we face in our day-to-day and when we're trying to do things where we simply need to put the activation energy in. I had another example where there was a co-working space where, very similar to being cancelled, I just wasn't sure whether the space was open. So I actually walked to this co-working space near where I live. It's about 10 minutes away. And the first 3 times, I kid you not, the first 3 times that I walked to this co-working space, it was actually closed. Or the first time I went, they said it's a half day for Chinese New Year. Maybe I should have known that. But I went a few days later and it was still closed. They were on break and their website hadn't been updated. And I went a third time and they finally had a sign there and it said, we're open tomorrow. And I remember that on that day that they were opening again, in the morning I was feeling, maybe I should just work. I'm living in a co-working space at the moment. So I do have a co-working space where I live, but it's relatively basic. It is still great. But I was thinking, should I really go try this co-working space today? Do you really want to do it today? You can do it next week. But I decided, hell, I'll go to it. And I was feeling really tired and lethargic walking to this co-working space. And I get there just after 10 o'clock. And it's open for about 12 hours from 10 to 10. And I got an incredible almost 10 and a half hours of work in that period. And it was so focused and it was such a great environment that the price, the activation energy I paid was a little bit of discomfort in the morning, was overcoming that little voice in my head saying that just stay here and work in the co-working space you have access to. I basically built 75% of an MVP that I wanted to for an Android app that I'm developing in a single day, which is absolutely incredible. It just absolutely accelerated what I wanted to do this week. And so that was a case where I paid the activation energy and got a really good product out of it. So I've realized that a lot of the things I'm facing in terms of this mental lethargy, I simply need to go through it. And that's not to say that you should do things which are very objectively bad for you or push your body to injury or do things you know are going to have bad repercussions. But there are going to be certain things where you know there is a potential benefit at the end of those activities, right? Such as trying out a new co-working space or putting yourself in a new environment or overcoming the hesitation to go and read that book that you've been putting off forever. And sometimes if you put that activation energy in, you're going to get something great. And with the concept of activation energy, there also comes in chemistry, they start teaching you about this concept called catalysis. And what catalysis is, a catalyst is a compound which reduces the activation energy to make a reaction happen. So if you drive a conventional internal combustion engine car, all internal combustion engine cars generally have, I think it's platinum in the exhausts. And the reason they have that is it catalyzes a reaction between carbon monoxide and NOx gases, which is better for the environment. And that's an example of where adding something additional reduces the activation energy to make that happen. And I realized that through repeat practice, through pushing through those moments of lethargy, those limitations, that is your catalyst. You are building your own catalyst. Your repertoire of experiences and the fact that you have done similar things in the past and overcome them will then reduce the activation energy for that activity in the future. So we can absolutely build our own catalysts. I think another example, I spoke a few episodes ago about accountability groups. And if you do need an accountability group, you should go get one. And the reason is that's an example of a catalyst. It might reduce your activation energy in terms of doing something great. So my prompt for everyone listening to this is, what are you doing to manage your energy and how are you paying your activation energy today? What are you putting off where you know that there is activation energy which is much higher than you going and watching YouTube or reading Reddit or scrolling through TikTok? And naturally, if that's the kind of lowest state, if that's the lowest activation energy, you are naturally going to gravitate toward those low activation energy reactions. But what's something that you're putting off because you know there is a high activation energy that you can focus on today, that you can focus on this week, that is going to lead you to a state that you haven't experienced? So that's my prompt. Pay attention to the activation energies around you. Every time you procrastinate, every time there's something you want to do, think, do I need to pay put more energy in to make this reaction happen. And go ahead and do it, because you might be surprised at what happens on the other side. So go ahead and pay your activation energy. I will end this episode here today. To everyone listening to this, I wish you great success on all your endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.